Hi, third grade, back today to read chapters 9 and 10. They're really, really good. We'll start right off with our PowerPoint. Dreams is full of mystery and magic. Do not try to understand them. Roald Dahl, the BFG. The key ELA standards. Remember, all of these lead up to the 3.10. I can read and comprehend third grade literature. Right now would be a great time to have your book in front of you because we're going to go over the vocabulary and then we'll read over our questions. Repulsive, intense distaste or disgust. I wonder how that's going to fit in the book. And tenderly, showing gentleness or sympathy. Now, this is a book about a child who has been taken by a giant. I wonder how tenderly is going to be used in the book. Now is a great time to open up your book, Chapter 9, The Blood Bottler. Question 1, what or who is the blood bottler? So you really need to listen for the description and to find out who or what it is. How did he get his name? How is the blood bottler different than the BFG? So you're looking how they are different. What examples from the text? And where did Sophie hide? What happened to her? So something's going to happen to cause Sophie to hide. And there's a space for you to draw the blood bottler. Make sure that you use the whole space inside so that I can see it. All right, now I'm excited to start. The blood bottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, "Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is a hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt?" "Look out!" cried the BFG. "It's the blood bottler." But before he'd finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snaz tumbler was lying near to her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. "Who is you jabbling to just now?" he boomed. I was jabbling to myself," the BFG answered. "Bizzleswaz," shouted the blood curdler. "Bug swallop. You was a-talking to a human being. That's what I is a-thinking." "No, no," cried the BFG. "Yes, yes," boomed the blood bottler. "I is a-guessing you was snitched away my human being and brought it back to your bungalow just as a pet. Now I's a-winkling it out and guzzling it as an extra snack before my supper." The poor BFG was nervous. "There's no one here," he stammered. "Why don't you just leave me alone?" The blood bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. "Runty little screwer, scrummer," shouted. "Puffling little swish figgler, scrippy little bottlewort, pruty little pog swiggler. I is a-gonna search the primroses." He grabbed the BFG by the arm. "And you is gonna help me do it. Us together is gonna wrinkle out this tasteful little human being," he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back. But now there was no hope in doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous snaz cumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The blood bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish pink. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy looking. His eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small, but his mouth was huge. It spread right across his face, almost from ear to ear. And he had lips that were like two gigantic purple frankfurters lying on top of each other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over his chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brute ate men, women, and children every night. The blood bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pipplin bottles," he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "No, nothing that would interest you," the BFG said. "You was only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you as dotty as the dog swaddler," cried the blood bottler. Soon the blood bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he'd be bound to search the tabletop. But before she couldn't think what to do. She couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break her leg. The snozcumber, although it was thick and it was there, she didn't want to hide in there. What if he picked it up? She examined the chewed off end. It had large seeds in the middle and each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in a soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, she made a decision. Sophie reached forward and scooped half a dozen seeds from inside and pulled it out onto the table. This left a hole in the middle of the large fruit and vegetable piece. Crouched in so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was wet and slimy hiding place, but what did it matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The blood bottler now and the BFG were coming back towards the table. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed up the half-eaten snozcumber, and the BFG stared at the bare table. "Sophie, where is you? Where is you?" he thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be a jumping off the high table. Where is you hiding, Sophie?" he thought to himself. "So this is the filthy thing garbage that you was eating," boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partly eaten snozcumber. "You must be cockles and guzzling such rubby squash." For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten all about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. "That is a scrumptious snozcumbler," he said. "I is a guzzling it gleefully every day and every night. And if you was ever trying that snozcumber, blood bottler, oh, you'd love it. Human beings is juicier," he said. "You was talking rummy tot," the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that only if he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. "I is happy to let you sample it," the BFG went on. "But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, please do not be guzzling the whole thing. Save me a snitchet for my supper." The blood bottler stared suspiciously with his small piggy eyes at the snozcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. "You is not snitch fiddling with me, is you, blood BFG?" "Never," cried the BFG. "Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting out how scrumptious and wonderful it is." The BFG could see how greedy the blood bottler's mouth was beginning to water more than ever. "Vegetables is good for you," he went on. "It is not wholesome to always be eating those meaty things," meaning people. "Just this once," the blood bottler said, "I is going to give these rotten some taste of yours a try. But I is a warning you, if it is filthy some, I'm smashing it over your sludgy little head." He picked up the snozcumber. He was beginning to raise it on his long journey to its mouth, some 50 feet up in the air. Sophie wanted to scream, "Don't!" But that would have been certain death. Crouching among the slimy sea, she felt herself being lifted up and up and up. Suddenly there was a crunch as the blood bottler bit the huge end off of it. Sophie saw his yellow teeth clamping together a few inches from her head. Then there was utter darkness. She was in his mouth. She caught a whiff of the evil-smelling breath. It stank of bad meat. She waited for his teeth to go crunch, crunch. She prayed that she was killed quickly. "Ew!" roared the blood bottler. "Oh, bleh!" He spat all of the great lumps of the snozcumber that were in his mouth, as well as Sophie herself, were sent shooting across the cave. If Sophie had struck the stony wall of the cave, she most certainly would have been killed. But instead, she hit the soft folds of the BFG's black cloak that was hanging against the wall. She dropped to the ground, half stunned. She crawled under the hem of the cloak, and there she crouched. "You little swine bugler!" roared the Bud Bottler. "You little pigwiller!" He rushed to the BFG and smashed what was left of the snozcumber over his head. Fragments of the filthy vegetable splashed all over the cave. "You is not loving it?" the BFG asked innocently, rubbing his head. "Loving it," yelled the Blood Bottler. "That is the most disgusting taste that's ever touched my teeth. You must be Bugles and Swaplin Sludge to like that. Every night you could be galloping off, happy as a hamburger and jolly, eating those juicy human beans." "Eating human beans is wrong and evil," said the BFG. "It is guzzly and glumptious," shouted the Blood Bottler. "And tonight I's a gabbling off to Chile to swallow a few human chili beans. If you was a wishing to know why I was choosing Chile?" "I is not wishing to know anything from you," the BFG said, very dignified. "I is a choosing Chile," the Bottler said, "because I is fed up with the taste of Eskimos. As important as I is plenty to eat colds in the hot weather, the next coldest thing to an Eskimo is a chili bean. Human beans from Chile is very chilly." "Horrible," the BFG said. "You ought to be ashamed. Other giants is all saying that they have wanted to go off to England. No, no." "Well, we're going to England tonight to guzzle school chidlers," said the Blood Bottler. "I is very fond indeed of the English school chidlers. Oh, they has a nice inky flavor, blood. Perhaps I will change my mind and go to England with them." "You is disgusting," the BFG said. And you is an insult to the giant people," shouted the Blood Bottler. "You isn't fit to be a giant. You is a skanky squiddler. You is a piddling little pitsqueak. You is a cream puff nut." With that, the horrible blood-bottling giant strode out of the cave. The BFG ran to the cave entrance and quickly rolled the stone back into place. "Sophie," he whispered. "Sophie, Sophie, where are you?" Sophie emerged from the hem of the black cloak. "I'm here," she said. The BFG picked her up and held her tenderly in the palm of his hand. "Oh, I am so happy to be finding you all right," he said, in one lump. "I was in his mouth," Sophie said. "You was what?" cried the BFG. Sophie told him what happened. "And there I was, telling him to eat the filthy snozcumber, and all the time he was inside it." "Not much fun," Sophie said. "Oh, just look at you, poor little chidler," cried the BFG. "You was all covered with snozcumber and giant spit." He set about cleaning her up as best he could. "I is hating those other giants more than ever now," he said. "You know what I should like?" "What?" said Sophie. "I should like to find a way of disappearing them, every single one of them." "I'd be glad to help you," Sophie said. "Let me see if I can think up a way of doing it." So end of chapter 9. So now take your question sheet. I hope you're listening for the difference between the BFG and the giant. And did you hear the 2 vocabulary words? Amongst all the other made-up nonsensical words that our author uses. All right, I'm going to pause right here. All right, so now we want to go to chapter 10. Three vocabulary words for Rob Scottle and the Whiz Poppers. Vigorously, a way of movement that involves effort and energy. Astonishing, extremely surprising or impressive. Inevitably, something that is certain to happen. So listen for those 3 vocabulary words. And you're going to listen, what is frobscottle? What are whisk poppers? How did you learn about the BFG in this chapter? Or what did you learn? How did the relationship between Sophie and the BFG change? I wonder it changes. So you're really listening for that. Then you're going to design your own bottle of frobscottle. Draw a picture and read and decorate the label, including the list of ingredients. The book is going to describe the flavor, but it does not tell us what is used to make in this giant country drink. Be creative with your ingredients. So first you can kind of draw what's inside here and then put the label, or maybe you want put the rectangle first and then draw your ingredients around it, or make one and then you can glue it. Okay. So now we're going to go to the book. I can't wait to hear frobscottle and whiz poppers. All these creative words used. All right. By now, Sophie was beginning to feel not so extremely hungry, but very thirsty as well. She had been at home. She would have finished her breakfast long ago. Are you sure there's nothing else to eat around here except those disgusting, smelly snozcumbers? She asked. Not even a fizzwinkle, answered the big friendly giant. In that case, could I just have a glass of water? She said. Water? The BFG said, frowning mightily. What is water? Well, we drink it, Sophie said. What do you drink? Frobscottle, announced the BFG. All giants is drinking frobscottle. Is it as nasty as snozcumbers? She asked. Nasty, cried the BFG. Never is it nasty. Frobscottle is sweet and jumbly. He got up from his chair and went to the second huge cupboard. He opened it up and took out a glass bottle that must have been 6 feet tall. The liquid inside was pale green, and the bottle was half full. Here's frobscottle, he said, holding up the bottle proud and high, as though it contained some rare wine. Delumptious fizzy frobscottle, he shouted. He gave it a shake, and the green stuff began to fizz like mad. But look, she said, it's fizzing the wrong way. And indeed it was. The bubbles, instead of traveling upwards and bursting on the surface, was shooting downwards and bursting at the bottom. A pale green frothy fizz was forming at the bottom of the bottle. What on earth are you meaning the wrong way? Asked the BFG. Well, ours fizzes, fizzy drinks, the bubbles always rise to the top. Upwards is a wrong way, cried the BFG. You must ever been having bubbles going upwards. Them is the flush blunkling rubbish I ever heard. Well, why do you say that? Sophie asked. You was asking me why? The BFG, waving the enormous bottle around as though he were conducting an orchestra. You was actually meaning that tell me that you cannot why? That is a mistake and have the bubbles flying upwards instead of down? You said it was flush blumping, and now you say it's scrawty. Which is it? She asked politely. Both, cried the BFG. It is flush bunking and a scrawty mistake to let the bubbles go upwards. If you can't see why, you must be as quacky as a duckhound. By Ringo, your head must be so full of frog squitters and buzzle-wangles. I is a-frittin' to know if you can even think at all. Well, why shouldn't the bubbles go upward? Sophie asked. Oh, I will explain, the BFG said. But tell me first, what is the name you've been calling your frobscottle? One is Coke, Sophie said. Another is Pepsi. There are lots of them. And the bubbles is all going up? They all go up, Sophie insisted. Catastrophus, cried the BFG. Upward going bubbles is a catastrophe. Will you please tell me why? Sophie said. If you listen carefully, I'll try to explain. But your brain is so full of bug whiffles, I doubt you'll even understand. Oh, I'll do my best, Sophie said patiently. Very well then, he said. When you was drinking this cokey drink of yours, it is going straight down to your tummy. Is that right or left? Right, said Sophie. He meant right or wrong. And the bubbles is going also into your tummy, right? And the bubbles is fizzing upwards. Well, of course, she said, which means that they will all come swiffling up your throat and out of your mouth and make a foulsome belchy burp. Yes, that is often true, Sophie said, but what's wrong with a little burp now and then? It's sort of fun. Burping is filthy-some, the BFG said. Us giants is never doing it. But with your drink, Sophie said, what is it you call? Frobscottle, he said. Well, with frobscottle, your bubbles in your tummy will be going downwards, and that could have a far nastier result. Why nasty? Said the BFG, frowning. Because, Sophie said with a little blush, if they go down instead of up, they'll be coming out somewhere else, even louder and ruder noise. A whiz popper, cried the BFG, beaming up at her. Us giants is a-making whiz poppers all the time. Whiz poppers a sign of happiness. It's like music to our ears. You surely is not telling me a little whiz popping is forbidden among human beings. It is considered extremely rude, said Sophie. But you is whiz popping, is you not, now and again? He asked. Well, everyone is whiz popping, if that's what you call it, Sophie said. Kings and queens are whiz popping, presidents are whiz popping, little babies. But where I come from, it's not polite to talk about it. You say excuse me when it happens. Redunculous, said the BFG. If everyone is making whiz poppers, then why not talk about it? We is not having a swiggle of this delicious swab squapple until you see the happy result. The BFD shook up the bottle vigorously. The pale green stuff fizzed in bubbles. He removed the cork and took a tremendous gurgling swig. It's glummy, he cried. I love it. For a few moments, the big, friendly giant stood quite still, and a look of absolute ecstasy began to spread over his long, wrinkly face. Then suddenly the heavens opened up, and he let fly with a series of the loudest and rudest noises Sophie had ever heard in her life. They reverberated the walls of the cave like thunder, and the glass jars rattled on the shelves. But the astonishing thing of all, the most astonishing thing, is the force of explosions actually lifted that enormous giant quite clear off his feet like a rocket. Whoopee! He cried, and then he came down to earth again. Now that is whiz popping for you. Sophie burst out laughing. She couldn't help it. Have some yourself, cried the BFG, tipping the neck of the enormous bottle back towards her. Don't you have a cup? Sophie asked. Nope, only bottle. Sophie opened her mouth, and very gently the BFG tipped the bottle forward and poured some of the fabulous frobscottle down her throat. And oh gosh, how delicious it was. It was sweet and refreshing. It tasted of vanilla and cream, with just the faintest trace of raspberries on the edge of the flavor. And the bubbles, oh, they were wonderful. Sophie could actually feel them bouncing and bursting all around inside her tummy. It was an amazing sensation. It felt as though hundreds of tiny people were dancing a jig inside her and tickling her with their toes. It was lovely. It's lovely, she cried. Just wait, said the BFG, flapping his ears. Sophie could feel the bubbles traveling lower and lower in her tummy, and then suddenly the explosion came. The trumpet sounded, and she too made the walls of the cavern ring with the sound of music and thunder. Bravo! Shouted the BFG, waving the bottle. You is very good for a beginner. Let's have some more. And here is the BFG and Sophie. So now you're going to answer the questions from the chapter and draw your own frobscottle. And on the second page, there's also a larger one. So you can use one for a tiny sketch, and then there is a larger one. And we will see you with the next chapter with Miss Batone tomorrow.